I want to welcome you all this evening to this webinar that Reverend Craig Taylor is hosting for us. This is a webinar that the COVID reentry team had envisioned back in December. We wanted to help as many folks, many churches and pastors as we could with improving or starting services online. I know it's a huge technological feat, and I was sharing with Craig earlier that a lot of what he's talking about with the video stuff is just way beyond my comprehension. So I'm thankful, Craig, that there are folks like you in the world. But tonight, I think that one of the nice things that Craig is going to talk about is if you haven't yet started streaming or recording video and getting that out and sharing it with your congregations, he'll share with you ways that you can start doing that. If you have been streaming or recording yourself during this time in the pandemic, but you would just like to bump up your skills and the professionalism of your video work, he is going to be able to help you do that as well. So I am so glad to have you all here tonight. Again, just want to welcome you. And I'm going to be watching the video chat, or I'm sorry, the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of the screen for just a moment, you will see a number of different logos. And you should see at the bottom there a Q&A. If you click on that, you will be able to ask questions of Craig, for Craig, and I'm going to help Craig making sure that he is aware of your questions in case he doesn't see them. I know that Craig has the ability to monitor that on his website, or on his screen rather. But I'm going to be here just in case, just to help him out. So again, I know we got some new folks coming in. I want to welcome you to this webinar on video. And our host tonight for the webinar is Reverend Craig Taylor at Stovall United Methodist Church. I want to start us out with a word of prayer, and then we will turn it over to you, Craig. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for the opportunity to gather tonight on the internet, and thank you for the gift of technology and the ability to share your word, the gospel, really, truly throughout the world because of this technology. So, Lord, help us to learn tonight and help us to serve you in all that we do. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Well, thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. And it's great to be with you all as we begin this webinar on excellence in video, which I don't claim to be fully excellent in video. I'm well versed in video. And I can see some of the chats rolling in right now. So, John, you're actually getting some conversation in there for you. So,
yeah.
Good for you. And so what's going to happen tonight as a basic run through is we're going to run through kind of 4 basic categories of what excellence in video would look like. And so those will be lighting, shot selection, camera selection, and then how we edit / choose what we're doing within a streaming or video creation process. And so at the end of this, my goal and my hope is that you feel confident to take those next steps that you want to take in whatever part of the videography landscape you're in, whether that is, an iPhone on the balcony, because guess what? We all start there. We all start in the same place. Someone picks up their phone, clicks stream to Facebook or YouTube, Vimeo, whatever your service is, and we get started. And then we think, how can we make this better? And we're going to close that gap on how you make that better, how you decide where you want to invest your money as a church and your time, and how you can take that next step forward. And so today we're doing our excellence in videography movement. If you have any questions during this, please throw them in the chat. Again, John's going to help moderate this because that's ultimately what this webinar is going to be. Yes, it's a teaching moment, but each of you can ask specific questions during this to help your specific context. And also at the end, I'll be sharing my contact information in case you want to get in direct contact with me. I've been doing this throughout the pandemic to work directly with churches, and I'll continue to do so because I simply love it. And I know this is a great new mission field for the church in terms of our witness in the world. So I will come out to your church masked up, socially distant, and help you figure out. I've done troubleshooting over Zoom calls where I said, point me at the audio board and we've worked out a problem. So I am dedicated to helping the Methodist Church, especially here in Kentucky, advance this cause and this ability to reach people in this newer medium. And so tonight, as we begin, we take a quick look at lighting. Is going to be one of the biggest components of how we achieve excellence. And so when we look at lighting, and is that backwards right now? I think it is, isn't it? That's not good.
No, it's fine.
It's fine. I can read it. Look.
Okay, it's backwards on my screen for some reason. I don't know why it would appear backwards. I guess Zoom flipped my cameras for me, but not for you. Good old Zoom. And if you'll notice, sometimes my audio might be a bit off. We were having trouble with Zoom receiving my audio and video at the same rate. And so we'll have to live through that. And that's one of the first things we can bring up is that you're always going to encounter problems, no matter how well-versed in videography you are. There's going to be some problem that's going to affect itself at some point. Whether, something changed on Facebook and now it's not the same way, or, the audio quality drops off and you don't know what happened because it was fine last week. We didn't touch anything on the board. It's lock and key. How did this? And it's just rolling with the punches on that. There's always going to be something new to learn, something new to figure out, something new to work through. And if you're wondering what I'm plugged into, this is a digital audio interface. It makes an analog board with all the funny little knobs and things into a digital service, which means that the audio comes through much cleaner. And that's going to be something talked about in a different webinar by Josiah Brock on advanced audio. So first tip, this stuff's going to hit the fan every now and then, and that's going to be okay because your congregants and your parishioners know and love you, and they know you are doing your absolute best in the midst of this to learn new skills that you were never prepared for. One of the common words we talk about as pastors is they never taught us that in seminary. Some of those most practical things like setting a budget or how do you baptize a baby? Don't use cold water is the obvious answer. Don't get covered in a seminary course. And likewise, if you're a pastor, if you're a lay member, I can almost assure you, you've never taught this as part of, your Sunday school class curriculum. This is something new. And so we'll move through that together and it's going to be okay. So lighting is a key important here because no matter how good your video is in quality, no matter how good your camera quality is, if it's 4K, if it's 8K, it doesn't matter if you don't have good lighting. And conversely, if you have a relatively limited camera, good lighting can make that video look infinitely better than it would be otherwise if you can light the subject appropriately. And the standard here is 3-point lighting. And what we mean by that is we have one light up front, we have one light just off to the side, and one light that is coming from a behind angle. And those lights are called the key light. They are called the fill light and sometimes the backlight, but I like to call it the rim light. And what these are doing, the key light is directly in front of you, and it's what is illuminating your face. It has the bulk of the work of making light. You then move on to the fill light. That's going to be off to the side. It's going to be a softer light that's going to fill in some of the shadows made by the key light, because you're not putting a light directly straight on your face. You're going to try and put it off to one side. You want to create a little bit of shadow because shadow makes dimension. And then behind you, you have a rim light from a high angle, generally that's going to cascade and fall on your shoulders. And what that does is it helps separate you from the background. There's also one more light we can talk about, and that is one that's not even pointed at you, it's pointed at what's behind you. And that's called background lighting. This is used a lot in stage and theater to illuminate the background to create depth. And that depth allows more drama in the shot because it's not a single plane of focus. You now have multiple layers of sets just like those old Disney animations when they made the lithograph scenes. Some were the foreground pieces of cellophane and some were the background, and you always knew which one was going to be an action part because it looked brighter. It was in a background. So you had multiple, it's called multi-plane cinematography is what Disney invented to do all those features. And so what we have here in this audio booth up here in Stovall is a makeshift setup of lighting. And so what I'll show you is right now I have 4 lights on me. I have a key light right here. I have a fill light just up to my left. I have a rim light directly here above me. And then you can't tell it right now, but you will in a second. There's a background light right there. So I'm about to show you what it looks like when I turn all those lights off. And you'll see a real big difference really quickly in how good the audio looks, the video looks. And so right now I have a big screen in front of me, so it's still putting off a little bit of light. But if I was to turn that off, it would be dramatically darker in the shot. And you'll have seen that the video quality already has started to drop. It looks grainy. It looks, undersaturated. There's not good contrast. My shoulders are kind of blending in the shot. There's still a light on down in the sanctuary right now. So we're getting a little bit of light and the basic lights that are up here. But this is the lights that would be on normally. If I was trying to film something in this space, it would not look that good. Because I don't have all of the available light to work with. So let's turn on just the key light real quick. Again, that light that's in front of me, and it's directly off to my 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock are great positions to focus a key light. Again, straight on, and then the person who's the subject has to look at it constantly directly in their field of vision. It's hurtful. It makes them squint. It's going to give them a headache after a while. It's not going to be a usable experience for them. So 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock are great positions to have a key light. So let's turn the key light back on. And then right now you can see that one side of my face is a lot brighter than the other. It's not that the left side of my face is in complete shadow, but we have some shadow here on my nose. We've got shadows from the eyebrow. And again, forehead is in shadow as well, but it's not empty and devoid of light. We don't want me to be completely encased in shadow. If I was to turn to the left a little and still be on screen, you could see a little bit of that is now much more darker. We want some of that light to fill in. And already you can see me as the subject is the prominent feature. And it's much like those old Disney cartoons, right? The piece that has action is always going to be brighter than the rest of the scene because that's what's most important. And I see a chat coming up from Jack about recording being available later. We are recording it right now, and this will be made available because, again, some of this is hard to process sometimes, or you might want to be able to watch it with a team. So this will be made available to watch at a later date. And so the key light is what's going to make us the worship artist, the leader of the prayer, the pastor, whoever is going to be the subject of our video shot, going to stand out and going to be easily visible to everyone on the other side of the screen. And the great way to think about this is we always have someone watch our live stream on the oldest phone that we have that works. One for audio to see, is our audio loud enough on someone's old device that doesn't have great speakers? But 2, what does our composition look like? And to think about it that way, many people are viewing services or they're viewing our Bible studies or whatever we're producing in editing or streaming on a device screen that is this big. We've got 5 inches to work with instead of real estate. Plenty of people are going to put it up on a TV or do other things like that. But when you only have 5 inches worth of screen to work with, you want whatever is the subject to really pop. And so when we're talking about lighting, one question coming in, do you want the lighting above the subjects? You can have different effects based on where you place lighting. When we're talking about a church scenario where we're talking about worship or Bible study or things of that nature, we really want to have the lights at eye level or just above. So my lights, I'll show you in just a minute, are positioned. My key light is about 7 feet in the air. My fill rim lights are about 7 to 8 feet. I keep them just enough above so that way I'm having a top-down effect of light. What we definitely want to avoid is a bottom-up effect of light, because what that's going to do is get the campfire horror story effect, right? All the shadows are now going to be going up. The top of your cheekbones are now going to be really dark, and your eyes will become sunken because the light is going to cause shadows to go into your eye cavity rather than fill them up. Our cheekbones are generally further out than our eyebrows in terms of our eye socket. And so when we put a low angled light, which is also true of a low angled camera, it creates a drama in the shot, but it also creates a little bit of tension. It innately makes us think something's going to happen, but generally we see this kind of shot in a horror movie, or this kind of lighting in a horror movie. And so that aspect, we kind of associate that implicitly. Now, very good question in terms of especially the key light, because the key light is coming for the majority of our light. That's 80% of our light. The fill light, is just filling in the shadow right here. And we'll go ahead and turn that one on real quick so that you can see the fill lights effect. Again, mine is a cross that we have that's illuminated right now. And if I turn on the background light, I'll get a little bit of fill in there as well when I turn that one on. We can see that it fills in the side, but it hardly changed anything. It's just a little bit. It's a soft glow. And then if we turn on the rim light behind me, we can see that my shoulders are now distinct. There's this edge of glow that's around me that makes me separated from the background. And I'll turn that background light off real quick just so you can see the difference that affects, right? Especially if I turn the rim light off and we have both of those off, my shoulders, especially if I'm wearing darker clothes, kind of start to blend into the background. But again, that key light, that's all I have on right now, mainly is the key light. There's ambient light around, does 80% of the work. That's the majority of our shot. So the farther away the subject is from the light, yes, you need more light. We actually have a spotlight up here in the loft. We don't use it because it's way too bright. But the further away you have light from the subject, the more of it you're going to need, because there's a fall off in the amount of lumens, or the intensity of light, that is able to make it over distance. Just as if you're speaking and you're farther away, you have to increase your volume. If your light is further away, you have to increase your amount of light. Think of it when you get a projector for the church, you have to have more lumens the further away the projector is, because it has to fight through all that other, especially ambient light that we might have during a Sunday service. Now, I have specific lights set up here, but we can use light to our advantage. Most of our churches are going to have windows within the sanctuary area. And so especially during the pandemic, if we're not having full in-person service, we can rearrange our space to make use of the available light. If you have an east to west facing church where the east and the west sides are the windows, which is generally how they're constructed to make use of that light, the left or the right side of the church is going to be really bright, one of them, during a Sunday morning service. And so you can reposition how you arrange people in the service so that there's more of this natural soft light that comes in. But yes, that key light is really important. That's why it's called the key light. Without it, you don't have the key. And you need to have that full effect of that light. So more intensity of light is better. But just like in anything, too much can be bad as well. We don't want to wash out the subject. Now, again, the fill light is doing that job of, again, filling in so that there's some light on the side of the face that's in shadow. And what that does, again, is create depth. We're creating depth between the side of my face. It's not single planular. And so then you would go and you turn on your rim light to differentiate yourself from the background. So again, you're making sure you don't blend into the background. And in many of our churches, what this looks like is we have choir lofts behind the pulpit, but we don't turn the lights on if we don't have a choir in there, especially during pandemic, which means you now have this big, dark, empty space that's not illuminated. Turn those lights on, because now the back wall was white, but instead of being in shadow, it's going to be lit up. And that's going to help differentiate, just like this background light does that I turn on, me from the background, or your pastor from the background, or your guitarist from the background, whoever it is. You want to have some light behind them in order to do that. And many of us will have a couple key lights, and that's what we would call them, placed up in the rafters directly in front. Many of those are repositionable, whether they're standard landscape lights or whether they're actual kind of hotter intensity spotlights. You can go up on a ladder and generally reposition those to focus them directly where you would like them. And so right now in our composition today, we have all of the available lights turned on. And what's that done is it's given us a lot more visual space to work with, because much more of the shot is now available to us in terms of what is capable of being seen. And I'll turn on this camera real quick, and we'll take you around and let you see what those lights actually look like. And we'll transition over to the handheld, not going to be a steady, but if you can see up here, we've got one directly over there. And then to my left, we have, that's the background light. My cross is the fill light, and then directly above me is the rim light. And those are pretty hot, and it's hard to see what they are. But if we look from the side, these are $5 to $10 tin shrouds. And what they are is basically heat lamp shrouds for chicken coops or anything like that that you get from Home Depot. And then I put an LED light bulb in them, and I turned them on. You can't vary the intensity of it. You can't do other things that would be a little more interesting, like being able to change intensity. But for probably under $30 total with shrouds and light bulbs, I was able to create a new lighting setup in an area that otherwise is one of the darkest portions of the church because I'm up in the eaves. All the lighting is made for the sanctuary, which is down beneath me. And so sometimes our sanctuaries aren't optimal situations in terms of this light. They're used to our eyeballs in terms of luminance, which have a much better contrast ratio and a much better resolution than any of our cameras do. So we need to create more light to get more out of our cameras. If you only have one light to start off with that you can move around and play with, then make it the key light. That's going to give you so much more in terms of your subject's visual space. And then you can proceed to other things. And it can be lamps. Again, it can be heat lamp shrouds. Again, anything can be a light source. The windows are a light source. And so let's use light to our advantage, because it won't matter what kind of camera we have if we're not lighting the subject properly. So that 3-point lighting is one of the most important starting aspects wherever you're at, whether that is going to be the sanctuary, whether that's going to be your Bible study room, having a good lighting setup to be able to make that shot more engaging is going to be one of the first big steps. And I know we've been asking questions during this. Are there any questions we have right now about lighting, or I can move on to our next aspect? Well, I think you've spoken. Let's keep marching on then. What comes next after lighting is, of course, camera selection. What are we going to shoot with? Are we going to have a phone, placed up in the balcony? Are we going to have, somebody's camcorder that they donated to the church? Are we going to use that? Or what about DSLRs, or those, prosumer cameras that kind of look really intimidating, or even the fancy ones called PTZs, which means pan, tilt, zoom. There's so many options for camera gear out there. It can feel a little overwhelming. And again, most of us are going to be starting with just the simple basic handheld phone that we've put into a little tripod, and that we've stuck either in the balcony or we've put it closer to the person. And so the first thing in determining what camera gear you want is, where are you in terms of your camera setup? Are you at the phone stage? Are you doing more camcorders, or has somebody given you a DSLR? How do you use these things? The best way to look at a camera is who's going to be operating it. So say you get a grant from the United Methodist Church, from the district. I know there's some of those around right now. I don't know if the deadlines have passed. John can probably mention that in the comments if they're still available. But there's generally money, especially right now, to help increase your live stream setup, your audio setup, purchase cameras and things like that. So say you get, $1,000 that you can put towards your video and audio setup. How are you going to use that most effectively? The way we might look at it is say, well, let's get the most expensive camera. Let's get that, funky looking one in the right corner. Let's get that PTZ camera because it looks the fanciest. Well, it doesn't matter how much you spend on a camera if you don't have someone that can operate it. So the way we want to think about cameras is lowest common denominator. Whether it's just going to be sitting in a corner and we just have one shot, or maybe we're up to multiple cameras and we want multiple shots, or we get the fancy pan, tilt, zoom PTZ camera and someone's up there with a joystick moving it around, panning around and zooming, and then pulling out to make multiple areas of focus from one camera. All of those instances still require a person to operate the camera. And so no matter how fancy or how much money you spend on a camera, it's not a solution unless you're capable of using it. And in the church, we're operating off of a volunteer base of help, which is wonderful that people are devoting their time to learn new skills and to be a part of this. But especially during pandemic, those people aren't going to be as consistent as we like. We can't rely on one person to be there every week. And many times that's maybe how we've been operating during pandemic, because we can't have as many people in the church. We can't have, 2 or 3 people in the audio video booth next to each other putting up a camera. So start first thinking about camera selection in terms of who you have to operate it, or who you can pull in, who you know that might be interested in saying, hey, if we were to get a second camera and have 2 cameras and have one of them be mobile, move around the sanctuary or just be on a tripod and you pan it around from edge to edge, would you be able to work with us on that? Because when you get to more cameras or fancier cameras like the PTZ, where it has a remote operating joystick, there has to be someone, or more likely someones, who are going to be able to operate it. And if the lowest common denominator here is someone that doesn't really understand it or doesn't know how it operates, then you have a weak link in terms of your camera. So it may cost $1,000, but you can't get it to operate some weeks because you don't have people that are available to understand the training, that are available to commit the time. So start first with your volunteer base, because they're your best camera people. They're the ones that are going to choose the shot. They're the ones that are going to help think through these new scenarios. And so go to them and see what they're comfortable with first. Are they still on the smartphone level, or maybe they're on the camcorder DSLR level? When you do get to choosing that, depending on the technical ability of your crew or your volunteer base, the differences between them become a little more obvious. Smartphones are readily available, right? And that's how most of us start. We stick a smartphone up on the balcony and it has Facebook on it and we stream it. But that's as far as that device can go, unfortunately, because it's handling not only the videoing, but the streaming. It's taking all of what we want and putting it out there. But, someone could be walking around and pinch zooming and moving this around, but whatever this is and where it's looking at is all you're going to get out of it. And as well, this is all your audio as well. So the smartphone is inherently limited compared to our other options, like the standard camcorders or the DSLRs. And then the PTZ, that fancy little rotating one in the corner that looks like a surveillance camera, and that's kind of how they got their start. And they're much more advanced now, works infinitely more areas than the other ones. But there's the other category of how to choose a camera. Once you get past the smartphone stage or the webcam stage, where you have one camera, whether it's the smartphone handling the streaming and the videography, or it's your computer handling the streaming and the videography, and you have a little webcam on top. Once you get past that stage, you have to figure out how to get your camera into a computer or a piece of hardware called a video switcher. When I started in my videography degree, the switcher I worked on cost $8,000. And it was low end. Thankfully, they have come down significantly from there. You can get ones as low as $300, and we'll go through those options. But eventually, the issue we fall into is that our cameras need to get into our computer. And the trouble is our computers don't speak the language of video. Inherently, they are not savvy with video. So they can understand a lot of things that get plugged into them. But the difficulty becomes that we need to get them into a new format, and they don't many times want to get there. And so our camera and our computer many times don't want to get along. And you'll think maybe, okay, I have that HDMI port on the back of the computer. That HDMI port on most computers that you're going to buy at Best Buy or any other outlet, unless it specifically states it, is only for video going out. It's to a monitor like this, it's to a projector, whatever your video viewing source is, it's to get video out of the computer to a viewable device. It's not for putting video in a computer. You need a video capture card to do that. And so that would be something you physically install in the computer. And most of our cameras are going to be something that requires a new entrance piece in it. This one has a micro HDMI slot to get video into some other capacity. This is a DSLR, small one. Whether it's a camcorder or any other option, you need some way to translate that video. And so when you're choosing a camera, you have to make sure to be able to get that video into your computer or audio switcher. And so if we're trying to get it into the computer, what we'll be doing then is needing a device in the middle. And that'll be our Blackmagic device is what I'll recommend. Blackmagic is a company that has significantly brought down the costs of doing video encoding. And that's what a video switcher or a video capture device do. And this is an external one that you're seeing on the screen here before you, and I'll put that full screen real quick. It's a tiny little device about 3 inches wide, and it takes HDMI, which comes out of your cameras. If you're to buy a consumer level camera, a pro level camera, a PTZ camera, whatever it is, basically anything beyond a smartphone needs to get that HDMI signal translated. And the Blackmagic device does it. But what this is a one-way device. It is taking one signal from one camera and then putting it into the computer. And what that does is it gives them the ability to have one viewable signal in whatever platform you're using. But what if you have multiple cameras that you want to use because you're now able to do that? How do you get multiple cameras into a computer? The physical way to do that is called a video switcher. But again, remember, those were really expensive back in the day. Well, Blackmagic, again, would be my recommendation. There's other ones, has something called the ATEM Mini Pro. And what that does is it is capable of taking 4 different video signals, whether that's 4 cameras or 3 cameras and a output from your computer for your PowerPoint. And it gives you buttons where you can switch between each and every single one of those cameras and then put them into your live stream on the computer. And so it takes away that inherent inability we had to not be able to use these other great cameras, whether they're consumer cameras, the bigger prosumer cameras, or DSLRs, PTZs. And it gives us the ability to put those into our computer. And the Blackmagic ATEM Mini Pro, the one in the middle of the screen right now, also can handle what's called encoding. So it actually can function independently of a computer, and it can put that signal directly out to Facebook or YouTube or any of the other traditional viewing sources we might have for streaming. And the Blackmagic Mini, the one on the left here, just is able to send that signal into a computer and make it viewable as a device like a webcam is already on our computer. So that's the hardware options. That's how we can get our cameras into our computers. Now, there are ways to get cameras into computers that don't require a hardware device, and those devices are generally going to be called NDI capable devices. NewTek is the company that makes these devices or softwares that allow us to get things that, like a phone, normally aren't going to interface with a computer as a webcam. And what it does is there's an app called NewTek NDI. Currently, it's only available for the iPhones, iPhone 6s and up. And that's what I'm on right now. So there's an iPhone in front of me. There's an iPhone beside me. There's an iPhone overhead of me. We have, and there's my mobile one as well. There's 4 iPhones that we use for streaming in our church because we can use them with this fancy NDI software that is a $10 app for the phone. And it takes that video signal and it creates it into a compressed video format. And it's going to take all that video data, compress it, and make it viewable as a digital stream of video that isn't, huge, massive terabytes of data that are being sent over. So it connects into your Wi-Fi. And with that, it creates a signal that is then de-encoded on the other end. So the phone runs this app called NDI, which all these phones right now are running. And then that sends it into our computer. And we use a program called OBS, Open Broadcast Software. Those $8,000 or more hardware physical switchers, the video switchers that we used to have in the past, well, there is a computer software option now that's free. And I would dare say OBS is one of the best ones on the market, especially for the ability to do it for next to nothing cost. Right now, my headphones are kind of squeezing on my ears. If you see me adjusting them, it's kind of pinching me a little. And so what that does is we take the phone video through the NDI app, $10, and you own it forever. So we paid $10 for all the cameras to have them available. We can now position our iPhones wirelessly. We still have some power hooked up to them just to make sure, but wherever we want, as long as there's a strong Wi-Fi signal, at least a gigabit to get them through. And then we put that into OBS. And so with that, we are able to then use a program, and I'll show you a little bit of that right now. This is my inception look at what's happening on my screen here of what it all looks like. And so here, this system we're looking at, again, it's being replicated infinitely on the screen, but this program right here is called OBS that I'm looking at right now. And it allows me to switch between many different views of cameras that I have doing the same work that the hardware switcher like Blackmagic A10 Mini Pro does. And so we want to be able to see all these different shots in some format, whether that's on the A10 Mini Pro, the hardware switcher, or whether that's on our NDI devices in OBS. Each one is performing the same function, just a little different way. NDI and OBS, the NDI is the encoding app for the phones, and then OBS is what receives it on the other end and allows you to move between different cameras, allows you to change things on the fly and zoom in and things on cameras if you have big enough resolution. The A10 Mini Pro or the A10 Blackmagic or the Blackmagic Mini Recorder are able to get that video signal in, and they do it very cleanly, but you have one shot that's not really adjustable. But it makes it very simple. So when you have that little device, you're able to put someone in front of it and say, hey, we have our 4 scenes of video, and whether that's an iPhone, whether that is their camcorders, whether that's DSLR, whether it's a mixture, they can hit button 1, 2, 3, 4 and move between camera 1, 2, 3, 4. Something very simple that a lot of people are able to do even without a lot of training. And that way we have more of an ability to interface with them. But again, that's the big deal when choosing a camera, whether we're choosing consumer cameras, whether we're choosing, digital DSLR cameras, whether we're choosing higher end PTZ cameras, we want to make sure we know how to get that video signal into the computer. And this massive diagram that's on there illustrates sometimes the many different ways that that happens. But if we can't get the video signal into the computer, it won't matter how nice our camera is. We have to get it into the computer in order to get it out onto the stream, because our phone is no longer doing it for us. So I hope that made a good bit of sense. Again, if you want a hardware option and you have one camera that you're getting that's nicer, but it's not a webcam, so it has HDMI out, you'll need at least a Blackmagic Mini Recorder, or the more upper echelon, about $300, Blackmagic A10 Mini Pro, which can handle up to 4 inputs of video and then translate it either onto the computer or send it directly out for you. So that's the hardware-based options. And then the other end is you can use a software-based solution for video encoding and use inputs for that as well. And you can use them in conjunction. So say you have a camcorder that's physical and you want to get it into the computer, so you're going to need the A10 Mini Pro, or you just have one that you need to get into the computer. You use the Blackmagic Mini Recorder, and then that makes it viewable on something like OBS, and you have a different input where you capture the screen. That's your PowerPoint, and that's what you're seeing on my screen right now. I'm capturing a PowerPoint that's on the computer and projecting it on the same screen as an actual video device. And so with that, you can use OBS in conjunction with Blackmagic to be your switcher if you don't have the A10 Mini Pro. And then you might be able to use as well an iPhone placed strategically somewhere with a software like NDI that makes that video signal compressed enough to go over Wi-Fi and be uncompressed on the other end by your software system. Right. Now, someone did lift that up, that OBS is not as intuitive as you'd want. Is that what you're talking about, John?
Yeah, I was going to bring your attention to that. The other thing I was going to let people know is, while you've been talking, I've been putting links to
I've been seeing those pop up
over in the chat. So not necessarily suggesting those particular retailers, but at least wanted to give you pictures of the device and where you might be able to find them.
The one-stop shop, if you want to make sure everything you're buying is reputable for video equipment, is going to be B&H Photo and Video out of New York. And one of the links up there is B&H Photo Video, and some of the others are from the direct manufacturers like Blackmagic. But if you're wanting to look through what's available, Amazon, I would not say is a great place to start, especially if you're looking for kind of those consumer grade or prosumer grade, you know, just a little bit up. Maybe you can plug a mic into it. It's different. There are hundreds of options, thousands of options now, and most of them are cheap knockoffs out of China, and there's no quality control, and there's no ability to really get exactly what you're going to see on the computer screen when it gets delivered to you. So unless you're buying, you know, Panasonic or Sony off of Amazon, many of those options that are coming out there that have no name attached to them, they're going to clog up the works when you're trying to search. So if you start at B&H Photo and Video, they're going to be a great, if you don't buy from them, at least a great place to search for audio equipment, video equipment, anything like that can be found on B&H Photo and Video. It's all they do. But for OBS instructions, how to learn these parts of the programs, there's a couple key instructional videos that I can share at the end of the video. If you look up on YouTube, you know, OBS and NDI, if you're wanting to use the iPhone app together with OBS, there's a bunch of instructions on that and the simple process, because you have to add one driver to OBS to get it to happen. And beyond that, how do you set up a scene and a source? There's lots of different intricacies for OBS, and there's a couple good instruction videos that I can send out in our chat link before we end today, Bruce. The last question that just came through, or two, will these devices and apps work with Ecamm? Now, Ecamm, are you referring to a specific camera that is an internet protocol camera or an IP camera? Is that what you're talking about, Shelley? And then to James, can you use a camcorder and an iPhone that's using NDI together in OBS? The answer is yes. OBS can handle a multitude of inputs and have many different cameras available to you, whether they're physical or coming over the Wi-Fi. And again, they have to be on the same Wi-Fi system and network. You don't actually need the internet to get them in, but you will to get them out. For the camcorder, you would need a video encoding device like the Blackmagic Mini device or the Blackmagic ATEM Mini Pro. So you have to get that camcorder into the computer. Once it's in the computer through that video encoder, OBS will be able to see it. And once you add your NDI software extension into OBS, then it's able to see that as well. And both cameras will be available to you once you add them into a scene. A little primer, we can't go in too deep, unfortunately, on OBS. Is it's set up by sources and scenes. So right now in front of me on this window is a scene. We have the boundary walls of our square scene. And what we have in it is two sources. We have the video source that you're seeing of me, and we have the presentation source of a screen capture of the PowerPoint. And so those two sources are placed on top of each other to create the scene. And when you move between things, between scenes, you're moving between different setups of sources that allow you to see different things. And this is actually the full setup, if you haven't seen it yet, of everything that's working here today. But again, each one of these that I'm moving through on OBS is considered a scene. And in that we have different elements, whether it's a PowerPoint, whether it's a video, whether it's two videos. And that allows us to have a different effect because of that. Ecamm Live. Oh, okay, Shelley, is a broadcasting program. I don't know if NDI works with them. It depends on the support they've given it. NDI is kind of the baseline process for that. There's other ways of getting video into broadcasting programs. One is called, IPCAM. And so it creates it as an internet protocol. And that's essentially what NDI is doing it, but they're compressing it with a specific algorithm that makes it super fast and low latency. IPCAM and other apps like that for iPhones basically create a internet address on your local area network or your Wi-Fi network. So your iPhone, Android, whatever it is, runs this app, and then it creates basically an IP-based link that you could type into any address bar on your local computer, not not at your house, not at a different business. It's only going to be on that local network. And then that IP address is something that your system, whether it's Ecamm, whether it's OBS, is going to be able to view as a source at least, or at minimum, you could do a screen capture of that internet IP address visible video. And so that's one way to, at minimum, be able to view them with things like IPCam. And I think IPCam is actually free. Now there's going to be a lot of latency and lag between the time someone talks and the time that video actually makes it to the computer with something like IPCam. NDI, again, is very, very low latency with their proprietary software they're using. So there's multiple video switchers, but that's the basics of camera selection. Is one, how do you get it into the computer? And two, how are you actually going to support it? Who's going to be operating it? That's how you're going to choose a camera. Now, the differences between the cameras, if we want to look at those real quick, can be pretty extreme between what they're capable of. So here we have that last one popping up as the PTZ. You can have someone in your audio loft manning a joystick, basically, and moving that one camera around to focus on your worship team, focus on your sermon area, if it's the pulpit, if you have a lectern, whatever it is, and then focus on a different lectern for, a psalm reading or whatever it is. That one camera can move around and it can be close. It can be mounted on a wall if you want it. The other two that we can point out is the consumer grade camera and the prosumer grade camera, which are going to be the more available ones that we can work with. DSLRs are nice. They have great big sensors to capture a lot of visual data, but they have a manual focus usually. You can't just set it on autofocus and it's going to work constantly. It might radically shift in and out, in and out, in and out. So we don't really want to use those directly unless they're already available. I wouldn't go out and buy a DSLR unless that's something that one of your congregants, one of your volunteers is comfortable with, or maybe they already have. And that's a great way to think about this, is what's already available to you. Because many people have photography or videography as a hobby, and they might have some of this equipment, and you might just need to buy a Blackjack mini device to get the video encoded to your computer. And that might be the only link in the chain you need to actually get right now in order to take that next step. One of the easiest ways is to start with iPhones or Android phones, depending on your app, to get that video signal into the computer, and then use a system like OBS or, as you pointed out, Ecamm. There's many systems. Apple has one that is extraordinarily expensive. So unless it's something that's already been purchased, I wouldn't recommend it. It works perfectly well. But again, price is a big concern for many churches around this. When you get to something like the camcorders, whether it's the consumer camcorder, like the handheld mini cams that we have lots of times, or that bigger camera that has audio inputs, their beautiful feature is high levels of zoom, that it's optical. Smartphones or smaller DSLR cameras don't have a lot of optical zoom unless you have a very, very big lens for the DSLR on it. The consumer or prosumer level cameras, and those are the terms that they'll use when you're searching for them, consumer camcorder or prosumer camcorder. The consumer camcorder kind of falling into that $400 to $600 range, and the prosumer cameras being above $1,000. But what you get is a very big lens that can zoom great distances. And so you can place that in the back of your sanctuary. You can put a person on it, on a tripod, and they can move that camera between subjects, and you can get more out of that one camera maybe than you would with multiple cameras if you don't have people really to operate them. And then again, the PTZ being the most expensive of this, you can put it right up close. It's small and inconspicuous. You can mount it on a rafter beam on the side for these laminated plywood beams that we have in most of our 1960s and 70s built churches. You can screw into those. It does not hurt them. It might not look pretty when you take it out, but you can screw in a bracket on the side of those and it does not affect the structural integrity. So you have this giant side beam that you can mount a ton of cameras to. And so you could have a PTZ camera mounted on the side, and they actually make NDI versions of the PTZ camera. So all you need to do is give them power, and then it's streaming wirelessly that codec of video to a computer that's on the same wireless network. And so there's many different options there, but again, they have different price costs. If you're going to position all your cameras in the back then you want to have a camera with a very big lens and a lot of optical zoom. If you can get cameras much further forward, then you can get away with smartphone cameras that run iPhone 7s and up run 4K on all of their cameras. And so you can do gradients of zoom with those where you might have one shot that you can make multiple smaller shots out of. A quick example of that is here's my side view that we have here today. But with that same one, I'm just going to, click my side zoom and boom, there we go. We have a closer shot of me from the same camera because I, zoomed in the camera because it had so much quality. So the more quality, which is resolution, 1080p, 4K, 8K, those are the terms you'll see. The more resolution, the bigger that number, the more available video space you have to work with. So when we're broadcasting on Facebook, the maximum it allows you to do is 720p, but you might have a 4K camera. And so you can zoom in like that. Right now, Zoom is limiting our broadcast if we have a presenter view to 720p, but in normal circumstances, if you don't have presenter view enabled, then it's going to limit you to 480i in terms of the resolution. So imagine you have a 4K camera with this huge video. You can zoom in really close and make a much tighter shot without having to physically move the camera closer. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to get any better. The closer you zoom in, the more grainy the shot's going to get. But that's some of those options. So if you can get your cameras close enough, you can get away with iPhone cameras, smartphone cameras, or less big resolution cameras. But if you're going to put them in the back, if you're planning on there being a great amount of distance between the camera and the subject, you're going to need a big lens. That's going to be one of the biggest factors, that and what's called a color capture device, a CCD. So there's no one stop fits all camera that I'm going to be able to recommend. It's going to be contextual on your budget, contextual on who's going to be able to operate it, and contextual on your space. Where can you put a camera that's not going to impede physical worship whenever that comes back? And so I would love to talk more about cameras, but I need to make sure we use our time wisely. Again, I will give my information at the end of this, and you can send me all your questions about cameras. Tell me your circumstances. I'll come out to your church and just look at it. You can send me pictures and we will figure out the perfect camera setup for you, and I'll help you set it up. I'm on call for this kind of stuff. So moving forward though, in our presentation, we need to talk about shot selection. How do we actually compose our shots? And so I'll have to real quickly move through all this since I undid a bunch of the slides. We'll get there eventually. There we go. Let's keep going. Again, that nice diagram of the many ways we can get video into a computer. Just remember that HDMI jack on the computer is not to get video in. You have to have a specific video card to do that. So when we're talking about editing, whether that is in real-time shots of cameras that we're going to live stream with using something like the A10 Mini Pro with the 4 buttons, where you can do camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, whether you are using, just an iPhone that you can move around maybe, or that you can compose a different shot with using something like OBS, whatever that is, there's some basic cuts that we need to know in terms of how we are going to think about what we do. The other end of this is not all of what we're doing is streaming. Many of us are going to be editing still. We're not doing something live. We're composing visual shots of recordings. And we can take maybe that one camera we have and take multiple shots with it. So we need to think through how we're going to be visual storytellers. How is the cuts or the edits we're going to make, or the places we're going to put a camera, going to tell visually the story, the narrative that's going to be happening? How are we going to get people emotionally invested in the worship, in the Bible study, whatever it is that's happening? And the first of those basic cuts that we're going to make is going to be called a hard cut. And the basic way of thinking about that is it's just an immediate cut between the subject of one shot and the subject of another shot. So if I was to have a view right here of myself, And then every cut I'm making in this, when I take it to the side view, boom, that's a hard cut. I transitioned it a little there. It was a soft transition, but basically I'm moving from one view to another, and it's just a cut between those two. And we're just flipping back and forth, cut, and then cut, and then cut. And if you're getting dizzy, I'm sorry. That's the basic way we can think about a hard cut. It's just matching up two pieces of video right against each other. And we can do that whether we have multiple cameras. We can do that with one camera if we're recording. And we can take multiple shots and then put them next to each other just opposed. The next one we need to think about, though, is a jump cut. And a jump cut, if you've ever seen it in YouTube, you'll recognize it. It's when we take a shot and we move it through time. So many times if we're recording someone, is especially when you're going to see a jump cut, is when we're editing recorded video to produce one concise narrative or package later. A lot of the times people are going to say, or they're going to have long pauses, or you're going to watch it again and think, well, that, piece of video wasn't really necessary there. That what they're talking about doesn't help. And so what you'll need to do then is you'll need to cut out whatever that is that's not available, whether it's dead space where someone's not speaking, whether that's someone searching for a word and going, right here, what's that word I'm looking for? You can cut out that section of video and audio and only retain, where they were speaking before and where they get back on track after. And you can remove this middle section and jump from one place in time to the other. So if you've seen those videos on YouTube, what happens many times is they'll have two shots. And so they can take the second shot and make it look like nothing happened. They jump to a different angle, but many times there's just one angle and they jump, and then the person seems a little bit off center the next time, and then they'll be back again, but they've made it very fluid in the speech. And so what you can do there is cut out those basic pieces of dead air and make the narrative more fluid, the story that's being told, the worship that's being presented, more fluid. And so with that, we can do a jump cut. We're going to jump in time. The next one, again, there's basically 4 basic cuts that we'll need for worship or Bible study or live stream editing. That next one is going to be a J or an L cut. And the best way to think about that is a J and an L are opposing, right? You have one with the tail going one way, one with the tail going the other way. And when we think about a J and an L cut, it's when we introduce either audio or video that hasn't happened yet. So many times we can see this in worship videos, when it's a live worship video and you have the guitarist or the singer up on stage and they're worshiping out, so my Savior loves, my Savior lives, my Savior is always there for me, right? It's focused right on there on the worship. And then that audio continues. My God, you are, my God, you is. But they cut to a completely different video. The audio from that same line of video continues, but they've cut a video on top of it. So we have the remaining audio down here, but a new piece of video that started, and maybe it's the drummer drumming, but it's still focused audio on the singer. So that would be considered, an L cut, where the audio continues from a piece of video and the video proceeds forward. The other way is you can, leave a video up and then put in audio from a next cut that hasn't happened yet. And so you reverse it. And so the video retains the timeline where it's visible, but no longer is the audio present from that. You see that many times in interviews. If you've watched, Dateline or 60 Minutes or anything like that, where there's one person interviewing another person. And so you have maybe your camera setups here. What happens is the presenter or somebody asks a question, and then it'll cut to the person responding. So I'm answering and I'm talking, but many times it'll then cut back to the interviewer before the person that's being interviewed finished talking. So the camera is now looking at the interviewer while the person that's being interviewed continues to talk, and they finish their statement, and you get to see the reaction of the interviewer to the audio that they're hearing just as you're hearing it. And it creates a little bit of emotional depth to what otherwise could just be something that's more factual. You get the reaction of audio that's being presented as this person is seeing and hearing it. So J and L cuts, you don't have to remember which one is which, basically is changing up and putting audio from one cut over another cut, or video from another cut over another cut. And that way you're introducing either visual or audio information before you see the rest of that cut. So the cuts overlap a little bit. And then the last big one we want to talk about is cutaways. And cutaways are when you look at a subject that's completely different than what's happening. Anytime there's a gunfight in an old Western movie, this is a great way to describe this. They're right there in the middle of High Street, right? And you know, all of it's about to go off. And so you're looking at one fighter, you're looking at the other, you're looking at the crowd, right? Everything's on the subject matter at hand. It's very easy to follow. And then all of a sudden, boom, you see a big visual image of a clock tower. Nothing else around it. You don't know where you are in space. You don't know where you are at the town, but some other new part of information that's helpful has been introduced, and you've cut away from the main action point. And then, you know, the clock strikes noon, and then it puff of smoke and all the rest of the action happens. But you've introduced something that wasn't easy to follow. You've taken the person that's watching away from this point of continuity where you see a fighter and the other fighter and all the townspeople. Largely your eye can follow easily what's happening in those, and then something surprising has happened. Now, we don't usually want to surprise people in worship. We don't want to, you know, just randomly show something that's not affected by what's happening around us, but we can use the cutaway shot when we're filming worship, when we're filming Bible studies, to introduce other information. And a way to do that, if somebody's talking about a specific subject in a Bible study that we're recording or that we're live streaming, we can have a video queued up that supports one of their points that they've prepared. And so we'll cut away from that main presentation, and they can continue to talk, but we can now introduce other information in that cutaway to show a video that, you know, if they're talking about people going fishing, we can show an image or a video of someone going fishing, and we've cut away from that standard source of information. So those are the main cuts we need to remember with worship, Bible study, live stream editing for the church: hard cut, jump cut, a J and L cut, and cutaways. So hard cut, put them right up against each other. Jump cut, move through the dead air of time and take it away, so you can jump from one part of a video to another to make it shorter, to make it more concise. J and L cuts, video or audio from a different cut overlaps that one to introduce new information early, or cut away some other supporting information that's not readily available. But then there's also some basic rules on what you should and shouldn't do. The first one is don't frame things at body segments. So when you're going to choose a shot, wherever you're going to put a camera, whether that, is right in the pastor's face up front, or whether that's going to be off to the side, do not cut a person off at a body segment. And I'll see if I can adjust my camera to show this visually. Tilt this down a little and I'll back up. When you cut off at a body segment, it looks awkward. It's kind of like, Casper the Friendly Ghost. It looks like the person's floating. It doesn't look as mentally available. I don't know if that's the right word there. It feels awkward. And that's a bunch of the ways you can think about these rules. Is we don't want to make people feel squeamish. We don't want to make them feel awkward. We don't want to surprise them. And so when you frame a shot with a human subject in it, you don't want to cut people off at body lines. You don't cut people off at the shoulders. You don't people off at the waist. You don't cut them off at the knees. You also don't cut them off at the ankles. So if you're going to do a full body shot, include the feet, because it just feels weird. And I can even show you what happens when we get up nice and close and we get nice. Oh, I'm trying to adjust it right there. So this is what happens when you cut someone off right at the shoulders. It doesn't feel good. I can just raise up a little bit now, and it feels so much better now that I know that I'm not in the middle of a body segment. So, don't cut people off on body segments is one of the golden rules of videography. Just don't do it, and you will have not committed the first sin of videography. The second is establish a scene. People want to know where you are. And especially in the pandemic, people haven't been in the spaces of the church, whether that's classrooms, whether that's the sanctuary, anything like that, in a very long time. But also we're introducing new people to a space that they may never have been to before. So when we think someone knows where we are in physical space, especially our new people that are joining for the first time online, if they haven't physically made it to our space, they don't know where we're at. So if we're showing a close-up shot of the pastor and then we take the camera over and either pan it to look at the worship artist, or we move to a different scene or visual of the worship team, sometimes that can leave people feeling lost and disoriented. If you've watched a basketball game, they always have an establishing shot. Football does too. They have that high camera in the middle that's showing you the lay of the land. And that leads into the third one, and that is move intentionally to lead the eye through a scene. Again, when we think about the framing that we're doing, we want to be a part of the narrative. We don't want to be against it. We don't want to go against it. You know, I move around a lot, I've had to make wide framing for myself. I'm a pastor that walks around a lot. And so sometimes if the person manning the booth up here is clicking the buttons to move around scenes and they're getting really into what I'm saying in the sermon, sometimes they forget to be choosing a shot, and I'll walk out of the shot and it'll be hanging for a second, 2 or 3 seconds before they choose a new video, a new scene that I'm in. We want to make sure we're helping to lead people through worship, through a Bible study, through the narratives that are being promoted, so that we can help them understand what's happening. And so that's why establishing a scene is important. People want to know where they're at in space. You don't want to be on the big wide shot for the whole series of worship, but you do want to let people know where you are. And then if you're going to move the camera, if you're going to pan between something, take people through that movement. Don't just whip pan and just move it right over there. You might know where that other person is and be able to land it directly on them, but people are going to feel disoriented. So if possible, if you have a camera in the back and you're moving from one side of the stage to the other, you can zoom out and then turn a little bit and zoom in, and it allows people to reorient themselves in space so that they're not lost anymore. So you're going to, go from a close shot to move to a further away shot to move to a close shot again. That's, how sports is work. You move between these different angles, but you don't just jump from one side of the court to the other. You want to move through the physical system of space. You want to lead the eye through. You don't want it to be taxing on a person to watch worship. You want them invested. You want them to be in an atmosphere that not only comforts them, but engages them. And if they're having a hard time following what's happening visually, it's going to leave them taxed at the end of the day, and they're not going to want to engage as much. So don't break people off at body segments. Establish a scene, let people know where they're at, especially if they've never been here before. And then lead people intentionally through a scene. You want that eye movement and that goes with framing too. You want to keep as much in the center of the frame as possible. Or if you're like me and your pastor walks around, they're going to move from one side of the camera area to another. And as soon as that subject reaches the other side, you need to be moving alongside with them to make sure you're not exiting that scene with them, or you have another one ready where they're going to come in and follow into that scene. So those are the basic rules of videography that we don't want to abuse here. That's the basics of it. The work of scenes that we want to compose, where we put the camera, whether that's a live stream camera or whether it's editing and we're choosing a physical shot that we're going to record and then edit later. The basic of it is you want the camera as close as possible. If you look at any cinema movie, if you look at any work of the film industry lately, or even in the past, rarely do they big wide panning shots that they sustain for a long time. Lawrence of Arabia, something like that, the big vast emptiness of the desert as it pans across, things like that, they'll do pans. But whenever there's a subject involved, unless it's necessary to see something far beyond them, you want to be as close as possible, because we retain most of our information engagement based off of emotion. We think it's logic, but what captivates people, what engages them, what actually helps them make decisions or make changes in their life is going to be emotion. And we perceive most of that through our face. we can hear language, but body language and facial cues are going to be just as important as words in terms of getting people to understand or be captivated or be changed by what we're speaking about, whether that's a Bible study, whether that's a program that we're producing, whether it's just, a simple message video that you're going to send out to update people. You want to get people as close as possible to that camera, whether that's having them physically move closer or moving the cameras closer. So get as close as you possibly, don't be up their nose and don't cut off at body segments, but get the camera closer, get the person closer. If that means you have to move around your space a little bit, do it, because that's really important to the work that is necessary of getting people engaged. One person said, do you recommend any video editing software before we conclude here? There are plenty of video editing softwares that are very capable. There's Final Cut Pro, there's Adobe Premiere, there's a open source software called Lightworks. It works okay, it's kind of quirky. There's a big user community around it, and again, it's free. Adobe Premiere and Lightworks are all pretty heavy on the cash flow, and it's subscription based. The one I personally use, I used to use Adobe Premiere. If you're going to be editing on a computer, I now use DaVinci Resolve. It is a cinema grade editor. It's not overwhelming. There's plenty of video tutorials that you can find on YouTube. It's pretty darn intuitive. I taught myself it in a week. Now, I have a video editing background, so that doesn't say a lot about me, but to learn an entire new editing software in a week is pretty darn fast. So it wasn't a big hurdle. So I would personally recommend DaVinci Resolve, and it's free. That's the big part. There's certain features, like if you want to export a 4K video, you need to pay more, but you pay one time. You don't have a subscription. You own that software forever, which rarely exists nowadays. So if I had to recommend one above all the others, it'd be DaVinci Resolve. Again, Final Cut, Adobe Premiere, Lightworks, DaVinci Resolve, they're all very good, but the smaller end editors, those are the big end editors like iMac Movie or Windows Movie Maker, are all very capable and intuitive and functional. And I know one person just mentioned, there you go, have iMovie on there. Don't be afraid of starting with them. I mean, yes, you can have these higher end softwares, but if you just need to make one small video, start with them. You can even start on your phone. One great one that doesn't support all phones, but I really like, I've made multiple videos for the conference on my phone. I recorded the video on my phone. I edited the video on my phone, and I exported it on my phone. At no other time did I take anything off of a device. It all stayed on a cellular device. And I'll show you that here real quick. Is Adobe Rush. I don't have it on right now, but you can also use, Google Photos has a utility for making videos that you can, from your video library, take up, and I guess I should put it right there for the overhead camera, videos and import them. And I've already loaded it just for the sake of time, but you can then extend the sliders to choose a different portion of that video or the next video. You can duplicate it. You can remove the audio from it. So I can mute that one. You can overlay music into it directly from this app. And then once you've got all your cuts of your different videos where you want them, and you can, play through to see how that would work. And there we go. There's my daughter, and then it moves to the next cut if we want to. We start at the beginning, and it's going to move through all the different little cuts that we've made of these different videos. And now it's going to the second video. All of that's available on the phone. Adobe Rush does the same thing. There's much more features available, but if you have Google Photos, you have a basic movie editor on your phone right now. So that's a great place that you can start, and all you do is click save to begin editing on that. Again, Adobe Rush is called the program. It's translatable between computer, tablet, and phone. It's kind of one account. You get 3 free exports with it, and then you have to pay. But most of your high-end smartphone devices, whether it's Samsung, the Google Pixels, LG, Thinks, whatever the higher-end flagship phones are, it supports nearly all of them. And you can film the video on your phone, so you can move around with your cell phone camera and record all the video that you need of, announcements or worship and all that. You can then go into Adobe Rush, or even you can only do jump cuts or hard cuts in Google Photos video utility. you can then compose these segments of video, and then you can export it and have it ready and put it up on Facebook. So you don't need to get deep into the editing software to begin with. Windows Movie Maker, iMovie, and then even on your phone, Adobe Rush or the Google Photos video utility. It's in the Google Photos app. All are capable of producing a well-made video right now. And so if you're still in the video editing stage, that's one great way to start to move up that. You know, if you have more cameras available to you, you can move to DaVinci Resolve on the computer. But those are some of the ones that I would suggest. And again, move your cameras, if all else fails, as close as possible, because this is where we're communicating, is in the visual spectrum. And so that doesn't mean that audio is not important. Actually, if your audio is crappy and your video is great, people will watch for 3 seconds. If your video is crappy and your audio is great, they will watch for at least 3 minutes. And that is empirical data. That's the first thing they tell us in video class. So Josiah Brock's going to be doing a webinar later on next month, and he will be talking specifically all about audio. But you can get great devices that can help you with your audio. You can get little sound Zoom mics. This is called a shotgun mic, and it plugs directly into the phone. So you're no longer using just a little pinhole camera right here. You can use an actual camera microphone that's going to produce good audio. You can even get bigger microphones like this shotgun microphone that can be attached to your cell phones. And again, there's plenty of things like gimbals that can help stabilize your video. One of our congregants purchased this one for under $100 off of Amazon, and it able to stabilize the video so he can walk around and do non-shaky video. There's lots of things that you can add on to begin to make your video better, but we want to get on the basics first, you know, and I hope that's been able to enlighten you today on that. And if you have any final questions, I'd love to hear them now before we end. And real quick, I'm going to start adding my contact information to the chat so you all can have that and be able to reach to me if you want and want more in-depth conversation on what cameras to get, on what might work for your setup. Again, you can also find my information on the conference website. If you look up the clergy through the conference website, you'll find me under there as well, in case you aren't able to put down all this information at one time or it's not available to you later. I know that was a lot. It's a big topic, and I wanted to hit some of the biggest basics before we got through this. So thank you for your questions. Those were really great ones to plumb a little bit more. And I know some people had to jump off early, so thankful we'll be recording this as well to put it out at a later date. So there's my information. It should be in the chat download. And I know one person wanted one of the videos for doing OBS. So I'll pull that up real quick before we get finished here today and post that to our chat stream. I think that was Bruce that was wanting that today. So hold on 1 second and we'll get that video for you. Sorry if the video is not as interesting right now as I find that editing video for us.
Craig, one question that I might have.
Go for it, John.
That it's more of a technique question, maybe. What is the effect of, or the psychological effect of doing cuts in video, like going from a front shot to a side shot? Does it help with us paying attention, or does it keep our mind active and involved in what we're watching, or what's the psychology there?
So the psychology behind cuts, again, as we mentioned, even angles of when someone asked, where do we place a light? If we place a light or a camera down low, even that angle has a psychological impact on how we're perceiving something. Drama is increased by either height or depth of a shot. So if something's up really high, we feel really lofty and we feel happy many times. With a shot's really low, it feels ominous, it feels depressive, it feels dark. Again, because of how the light's cast in the shadows. So equally as much, cuts have a psychological effect. That's a great question, John. And so the way we can think about cuts is how naturally we view the visual spectrum. When we look at a composed area, naturally our eye line falls along the 2/3 mark of any given field of view. So if you look at websites, they're going to put all the main information in that 2/3 above the bottom of the envelope section of the shot. Again, that's why my eyes and my head are right here in the shot. It's composed so that our eyes fall directly where they need to go, but our eyes aren't stationary. Even though our eyes look like they're not moving, they have little rapid perceptive movements all the time, scanning all the visual data. That's why even if we're not looking forward at something, when something appears on our periphery and we can't quite see it yet, that 230 to 260 degree field of view that we have right here at the edges, we're able to perceive it because our eyes are actively looking even over there. They're perceiving it even if we're focusing consciously forward. So our eyes are geared to take in lots of visual data and spectrum. And so if we constantly keep the subject stationary, if we keep the video stationary, it doesn't challenge our eyes. Again, we want to make it easy for the eye. We want to keep things generally in center of frame. But when we're creating cuts, we can move with the narrative of the story to engage our eyes, engage our ears as well, but mainly we're talking about video. So if right now I'm standing further away and I begin to get to an intense part, whether we know it in the sermon or a Bible study of it, and I'm going to make a strong claim, what we can do is we can enhance that with the upcoming shots. So we know that we want to get a different perspective. So if I'm saying, well, there's something different about what we're talking about today, I take away from the main shot and I look at a different camera. It takes coordination, but you automatically engage a part of the brain that says something different's happening. You can have your basic shot and then you can come back to it and say, well, this is what's happening right now, is something really important. I want you to pay attention. So I'm going to take a different view. And you literally can move the camera to a different view and it's going to signal that something new is happening. And so we get to that pivotal point, and again, I turn and I say that something new is happening here. And if we get really, really important, we can get really close and take that nice zoom that brings us nice and close and intimate. And so right there, we've visually moved the field of view from something that's larger to something that's smaller to something that has a different perspective, and we get up closer and we can make that final statement. And then we can cut back to our main view and get back to the broader depth. And so we've created a visual storytelling narrative that helps us walk through what the actual words are that are happening with the presenter, with the narrative that's being told. And if we're editing, we have a little more control on that because we can look at it later. We have to have all these angles and know ahead what we want to tell. So if you have a script, you can say, hey, here's where I definitely want to get closer. Whenever I'm going to hold something up on stage, if I have like a little pebble or something like I had for baptism of the Lord Sunday this last week, I let the people know up top, hey, I'm going to have a really important moment where I'm going to hold up one small thing. So if Jake, our guy with the gimbal, wants to be ready, he can come on down there and he can get up really close. And you can see that from our shot this past Sunday, and he was right up on the pebble. And again, it got so intimate. So when we change our shot selection, we can change the tone and the feel of what we're telling. So equally as much, if we choose the wrong shot selection, if someone's lowered their voice, if they've gotten really intimate in what they're talking about, if they're sharing something personal, and we, instead of choosing a close shot, get the big wide, omniscient view shot where we see all of the sanctuary, well, now we're at odds with the story that's being told, and it feels uncomfortable. But equally as much, if we follow that narrative that's being developed, and we can feel it out as well up top if we're making live cuts and live stream, or if we're editing, we can make things closer and more intimate if we follow that narrative. So I hope that addressed it a little bit, John. I didn't want to take too much time. I know we were trying to keep it at an hour, But I think I'm a little excited sometimes about video.
Well, that was helpful. I just noticed it in a lot of professional work, and
Yeah.
I was figuring there was surely a reason for it.
Yeah. So being able to not confound the person that's watching, so leading them through the shot, but your leading shots can help develop that narrative. When you look at other cinema endeavors, they have different ways of filming. They have different, theories behind how you should film. And one of the most interesting ones recently is center framing. And that was on Mad Max Fury Road. Every shot of that is in center frame so that the eye is always ready. So there's none of this cross shot movement from one side to the other. Everything's following in center frame or planimetric frame, all those Wes Anderson films, why they feel so weird and so Wes Anderson. Every shot's completely flat. If you've ever noticed that, everyone's parallel to the background. So there's many different ways to approach how you compose a shot. But for the work of the church, especially since we're talking about a gospel that's personal, a God that's personal, a salvation that's intimate and direct through the access of the Holy Spirit, we really need to think about shots that bring people into that intimate space, because many times they've been so separated from it. So if we're going to tell that gospel narrative stories, many times we need to move from the outside, those larger shots, into the closer ones and choose that effectively. Or if we're moving into a new frame of reference, a new topic, we can take a side shot where it makes us think, hey, we're going to be talking about something different now. So I think that's all I have for tonight, unless we have other questions. I've really enjoyed this. I had so much fun setting up the loft for all this. And again, I'm sorry if the audio is not matching the video right now, because remember, stuff's going to break. Things aren't going to go exactly according to plan. It's okay. We'll learn from it. We'll move forward from it.
All right. Well, Craig, I'll just kind of give us a moment here to allow folks to type in any more questions in the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen. We want to make sure to give you plenty of time.
Someone just asked, is there any good links for OBS training? The one link I put down there is how to use OBS and NDI. That's a YouTube video by a channel called Stream Geeks. And if you think what I did here today, manually switching between all these cameras, was impressive, you should watch them. They have a whole series based on OBS and on NDI and on different ways to use them together, and also other technologies that intersect with them. So that entire channel is just loaded with great stuff. I would always stop at Stream Geeks first if I wanted to learn, and that's where I do go if I wanted to learn more about OBS that I don't already know. So if you follow that YouTube link that we've put available there, it'll take you to Stream Geeks, or you can type that into YouTube, and most of their stuff is going to be really readily available. It's going to have great diagrams of reference for how things kind of flow through a system. I did my best today, but I'm not as great with diagrams. They are really high end on that. So that's one great place to get there. And again, you don't have to be like me today doing a live stream all by yourself. Generally, you're going to have somebody else with you. So share the load and invite people in. This is a great way to use youth, because they already are doing many of this themselves. So many of our youth stream live on Twitch. If you've ever heard, that's a gaming live stream platform. And so they already know so much of this that you can sit them down in front of it and they automatically get many of it. It's a great way to bring youth into the church in ways that we haven't thought of before. That's how I started in the church, was on a big old mixing board like this. They let a 14-year-old Craig add a couple $1,000 piece of equipment. I still can't believe they let me do that. But that was my first big entrance into the church.
I put the link down to in the
to Twitch
chat for Twitch. The interesting thing about Twitch, just for folks to know, is I think while it originally was a video gaming streaming kind of a place, it's really kind of branched out now, and there's a lot of other folks on there.
It has
are streaming about hobbies and all kinds of things. So it may be another.
Yeah, so there's the basic platforms that you can stream through. You obviously has Facebook, which is really great for the community aspect, because there's a lot of already built in ways to engage, whether it's through frowny face or angry face or comments, and you can do events tied into it. There's YouTube. Again, Facebook limits you to 720p on broadcast. YouTube allows you to go up to 1080. But again, you don't have as a big of a community feature. You have comments, but that's about it. You can't tie events in as easily. The next grade up, if you really want the high quality video, is Vimeo. They allow you to do so much in terms of customization. It is a tiered program, so you do have to pay for the use of it. And then you've got what is more the, what would have been considered the segments that were specific on topics. You had Twitch that was mainly for gamers, but has become so much bigger. One that's still around, but not as much as Periscope. That was an easy way to live stream, you know, about 5-6 years ago. That's kind of fallen out for a little bit. Wow, these are popping up like right as I say them. You guys are really on top of the list today. And then beyond that, there is custom solutions now. So I forget who uses a Revolution UMC here in Louisville uses a custom solution. And so it uses your video database backend. So you'll use YouTube or use Vimeo or use some video source to host the video. And so that's eventually where it'll end up. But the front end, what's on your website is a church.live TV, I think is what it's called. Don't quote me on it, but it creates a fully custom interface that's just your video. And then it has 2 panels on the side that allow you to have interactions such as comments during it. And then also a prayer channel where you can request prayer and someone can be moderating that. And so it's a fully church customized video streaming solution. It utilizes YouTube or Vimeo or some video hosting backend to actually put the video on, but kind of the skin on it, you know, is fully customizable to your church, embeddable on your website. So you're no longer going through Facebook or through YouTube to drive your traffic. Instead, you say, hey, show up at 11 a.m. at, you know, stovevolumc.com/live. And so you can direct more of that traffic to your front door. And I'm trying to remember what that service is called. If you go to Revolution UMC's live stream on their website, it'll have that branding at the bottom that'll tell you what it is. And for the life of me, I can't remember at the moment.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig, for your time and all the preparation that you put in for this webinar. We really do appreciate it so much. And thank you to all the participants as well for showing up tonight. We had a great group, and I really truly hope that we were able to help you in your church ministry for your video and streaming for your services. We really wanted to and hoped to be able to help you all out there, service you. So I believe that we are good to close up the webinar.
Yeah. And again, reach out to me if you have any more questions or just want someone to review a camera that you say, is this actually going to help us? I'm here to help. And then please show up for Josiah's webinar and all the others happening, but he'll be directly on audio, which is so important later on next month.
I think Josiah's webinar is, I think it's tomorrow night, I think.
Is it tomorrow night? I have to look at the schedule again.
Yeah. No, it's not tomorrow night. Tomorrow is Jordan Abel.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I think Josiah's at the beginning of February, if I remember.
That's Keith Catter-Heinrich.
Oh, yeah, he must be. Oh, I've done that too. Got my little antenna back there.
Oh,
well, thank you so much for having me here today, John, and for Kathy and Connie who've been moderating behind the scenes. We have a lot of fun on the communications team, and we haven't seen each other in a while. So this was just a wonderful time for me to be able to help engage with the work at the conference. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you much.